Hello friends! In this video we're going to talk about this new palette from Charlotte Tilbury, the Beautyverse Love eyeshadow palette. And in this video I will share all the information you need. I'm going to talk about the eyeshadow formula, the color story. I will show you some of the looks that I created. I will do some comparisons, so a lot to talk about. If you are new to my channel, hello, my name is Danielle, I'm Fedora Beauty, and I like to talk about everything makeup beauty related, especially luxury and high-end brands. But every now and then you will find some mid-range or indie brands on my channel too. If that sounds interesting to you, then make sure to subscribe to my channel. And without any further ado, let's get started. Let's start off with some general information about the new Charlotte Tilbury holiday collection. There is this eyeshadow palette, the Beautyverse Love eyeshadow palette, but there is also an advent calendar in that heart-shaped box. Maybe you've already seen that one. I believe there are also single eyeshadows coming. I think those are re-releases. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm gonna check that. And also some kits for the holidays, like lip kits, something like that. So it's not just this palette. This palette, the Beautyverse Love Palette, retails for $69 US. It contains 9 grams of product and it's made in Italy. So this Beautyverse Love palette is the successor to the previous Beautyverse palette. I think you all remember that palette with those brown taupey shades and these sparkly shimmer shades. There were some pink and purple shimmers and a silver and a champagne tone. I think you all remember that one. There was a lot of raving about this palette on Instagram, on YouTube. Everyone was raving about that palette. I bought it, but I wasn't that impressed. And that hasn't so much to do with the formula or, you know, the quality. I just thought that it wasn't a festive holiday release. You know, all the shades, they gave me this more spring-like feeling. I don't know exactly why. I think it has to do with the shimmer shades in the palette. I just didn't find it very festive, very Christmas-like. No, not at all. I do think that this new Beautyverse palette is more of a holiday palette. And this new Beautyverse Love eyeshadow palette also contains 9 shades, just like the previous Beautyverse palette. The biggest difference is that this palette, this contains 5 mattes and 4 shimmers, and the original Beautyverse palette contains 4 mattes and 5 shimmers. So that's the biggest difference. Of course, the color story is very different as well. I think you can clearly see that. This one is, of course, a more rosy toned rosewood palette. A little bit of burgundy is in here too. It even gives me a little bit of berry when I mix some of the shades. So pretty different color story compared to the original Beautyverse palette. So let's have a closer look at this color story. First up, we have the transition shade. This is called Futuristic Pink, and this is a matte shade. It's a matte rosewood shade, very pretty and perfect to use as a transition shade. Up next is Cyber Rose, a pinky rose shade. And then we have Supernova, which is a little more brown in tone, like that true rosewood shade. And then we have Virtual Romance, which is a burgundy shade. And then we have Offline. It's not black, it's a very dark brown shade. In terms of pigmentation and color payoff, this is a very buildable formula. Do not expect very intense color payoff. You have to build it up. So that means that you can apply these like a very sheer wash of color, but you can also really build up the shades, really build up the intensity of the shades to create a more glamorous or more smoky effect. But you can also really easily use these for everyday looks, for the office, for work. The pigmentation and color payoff are good. I like when I can really build up the intensity of a shade and not have to worry too much about whether it's going to be too intense or too loud, too bold, you know. So I really like this formula of these mattes. So now let's talk about the shimmer shades in this palette. The first one is like a rosy champagne color. It's called a party topper. I don't really see the party effect in these party toppers. The other Beautyverse palette had a party topper too, but I do not really see the party effect or party aspect from these shades. I'm sorry, Charlotte Tilbury. I like the shades. It's just like a regular shimmery topper shade. And then we have the Pixie Pink shade, and that is a very soft old rose shade. Very, very pretty, and this one is perfect for a subtle look. When you prefer that kind of subtle shimmer, then I am pretty sure you will really enjoy this shade. It feels a little bit gritty, but it does apply very smoothly. So I didn't have like any issues with it. I do think that this one has a little bit more fallout compared to the other shimmer shades. And up next is the rose gold shade, and this one has more of that rosewood tone, a little bit of brown to it. Very, very pretty shade, but this one doesn't apply as smoothly as the Pixie Pink shade. It is slightly harder pressed. So yeah, the color payoff is also a little bit different compared to the Pixie Pink shade. And last but not least, my favorite shade, Digital Pink. I love this one. This is really the star of the show, in my opinion. And this shade, it's a little bit hard to describe. It's not a duochrome shade, but depending on the light and depending on the angle, I see different colors, different shades in this shade. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but you know, I see the berry and I also see the redness, touch of pink. So it's a little bit hard to describe. I think you have to see this in person to understand what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful metallic shade that applies without much effort. I really enjoy that shade. It's, like I said, I think it's the star of the show. That shade really stands out. For me personally, it's the shade that I like the most. Application wise, I don't have much to complain about. The mattes are very soft and they apply very easily. I think these mattes are great for beginners. These are very user friendly. I did experience a little bit of fallout with the dark brown shade. It seems like that one is slightly more powdery compared to the other mattes in this palette. So I would recommend doing your eyes first before applying any foundation or concealer, because you know those dark pigments aren't that easy to remove from the face with a fluffy brush or something. So yeah, that's the best advice I can give you. With the shimmers, I did notice a little bit of fallout as well, but it wasn't that big of a deal. I have to say that I prefer applying the shimmer shades with a brush and not with my fingertips. And I've had the same thing with the Beautyverse palette from last year. For some reason, the color payoff is better when you use a brush. Well, for me, it's better when I use a brush, when I apply them with a brush. The colors are like more intense when I use a brush. So that's how I like to apply these. When you use the fingertips, the shades are just more sheer. So when I use a brush, especially when I use natural hair brushes, the color payoff of the shimmers, the intensity of the shimmers is just a little bit better compared to fingertip application. Also, the longevity of the shades is pretty good. I think I started seeing some fading of the shades after about 10 to 12 hours of wear, something like that. So no complaints about the longevity of these shades. Let's do some comparisons, because of course I have to compare this palette to the original Beautyverse palette. So yeah, let's discuss that one first. I think it's pretty clear that both of these color stories are very, very different. The original Beautyverse palette that was released in 2023 has more of a neutral color story with some pops of color. You can clearly see that we have these neutral browns, and then we have these pops of color with the purple, the pink, the champagne tone. Yeah, the new palette, the Beautyverse Love Palette, is of course very different because it has this rosewood burgundy berry vibe to it. Obviously very, very different. I have also compared the Beautyverse Love Palette to this palette from Nars. This was the holiday release from 2023, and this palette is called Endless Nights. And these two color stories, they look a bit similar. I can clearly see some similarities in both color stories. You can see in these swatches that the rosewood vibe is definitely there, you know, in both of these palettes. Some of the shimmers are a little bit similar. The mattes are a little bit similar in tone. It's not like completely the same, but I think when you have the Endless Nights palette by Nars, you don't necessarily need this new Charlotte Tilbury palette, because you will have that same vibe with the Nars palette. And from all the palettes that I have in my collection, this color story came closest to the Charlotte Tilbury Beautyverse Love color story. I have also compared the Beautyverse Love palette to a palette from Pat McGrath, the Mothership number 7, because I thought maybe there are some similarities in those color stories too. And of course the formula is completely different, and also the shimmer shades in the Pat McGrath Mothership are completely different. But I thought maybe the mattes are a little bit similar. Overall, I think that the Mothership 7 is more muted in tone. It does have that rosewood vibe, but I think it's more present in the Charlotte Tilbury Beautyverse Love Palette. So yeah, not very similar in my opinion. They both kind of have that same vibe, but in my opinion, the Mothership 7 is more of a spring palette compared to this new Charlotte Tilbury palette. Well, let's share my final thoughts and my experiences. I think that I really like this palette. Yeah, and that kind of surprises me too. Usually I am not into rosewood shades, but this one feels special to me. I can't really explain why, but I like the looks that I created with this palette. I like how the shades look on me. I like how the shades work for me. So I really enjoy this Beautyverse palette. And yeah, that kind of surprised me because I wasn't very in love with the original Beautyverse palette. So yeah, I am actually pleasantly surprised by this new palette. And what I really like about this Colorstory is that it has a certain sophistication to it. And I miss that usually with other pink rosy color stories. You know, sometimes those kind of color stories can be a little bit too girly for me. And this Colorstory feels like a grown-up version of Rosewoods. When I look at the quality and the color payoff, the formula, it's steady, it's very good. The shades are very easy to work with. The mattes are very soft, smooth, buttery almost, and they apply without much effort. Same goes for the shimmer shades in this palette. So overall, I had a really great experience with this palette. I really enjoy it, and I am pretty sure that I will get a lot of use out of this palette. If this Colorstory speaks to you, then I think you won't regret your purchase. It's a very nice and easy to use palette. So yeah, I think I've told you everything I wanted to tell you about this new Charlotte Tilbury palette. Please let me know what you think of this palette, what you think of the Colorstory. Are you going to buy it? Please let me know. And I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.